When Dr. Michael Carter saw the police lights behind him, his first thought wasn't about the traffic stop, it was about the little girl he'd just saved. 3 hours earlier, she'd been rushed into his emergency room after a devastating car accident, her small body broken and bleeding, her chances of survival dropping with every passing minute. Carter had worked a miracle, performing surgery that few doctors would have attempted, bringing the child back from the edge of death through skill, determination, and a refusal to give up. Now, exhausted and emotionally drained, he was finally heading home when Officer Bradley Thompson decided that a black man driving a BMW through this wealthy neighborhood needed to be investigated. The irony was crushing. The same hands that had just saved a child's life were about to be handcuffed by that child's father, and neither man knew the truth that would make this the most shameful moment of Thompson's career, and the most eye-opening experience of both their lives. The clock on the dashboard of Dr. Michael Carter's BMW read 3:47 a.m. as he turned into Maple Heights, one of Atlanta's most exclusive residential neighborhoods. His hands still smelled faintly of antiseptic despite 3 washings, and his blue scrubs were wrinkled from 12 hours of intense emergency room work. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the miracle he'd just witnessed in operating room. 3 hours ago, a 7-year-old girl had been rushed through the doors of Children's Hospital of Atlanta, her body mangled from a head-on collision that had killed her mother instantly. The paramedics had given her a 15% chance of survival. The trauma team had bumped it up to 25%. But Dr. Carter had looked into those small, frightened eyes and refused to accept those odds. The surgery had been the most challenging of his 15-year career. Internal bleeding, damaged organs, a collapsed lung, and trauma that would have killed most adults. For 4 grueling hours, Dr. Carter had fought death itself, using every technique he'd learned during his residency at Johns Hopkins and his fellowship in pediatric trauma surgery. When the little girl's heart had stopped twice on the operating table, he'd personally performed CPR until it started beating again. When other doctors suggested it was time to let her go, he'd insisted they had to keep trying. And somehow, miraculously, it had worked. The girl was now stable, sleeping peacefully in the ICU with her father sitting beside her bed. Dr. Carter had delivered the news personally. She was going to live, to grow up, to have the childhood that had almost been stolen from her. The father had broken down in tears, grabbing Carter's hands and thanking him over and over for saving his daughter's life. Now, driving through the quiet streets toward his own home, Dr. Carter allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This was why he'd become a doctor. Moments like these, when skill and determination could literally bring someone back from the edge of death. The exhaustion was overwhelming, but it was the good kind of tiredness that came from knowing you'd made a real difference in the world. That's when he noticed the police car in his rearview mirror. Officer Bradley Thompson had been patrolling Maple Heights for 2 hours, hoping for something interesting to break up the monotony of the night shift. At 28, he'd been a cop for 6 years, working his way up from the rough neighborhoods downtown to this prestigious assignment, protecting Atlanta's wealthy elite. The residents of Maple Heights paid good money in property taxes, and they expected their streets to be kept safe from the kind of people who didn't belong. Thompson prided himself on having good instincts about suspicious activity. A black man driving a luxury car through this neighborhood at 4 a.m. definitely qualified as suspicious. The BMW was expensive, probably worth more than Thompson made in 2 years, and the driver was wearing what looked like hospital scrubs. None of it added up in Thompson's mind. His first thought was stolen car. His second was drug dealer trying to blend in with a legitimate cover story. Either way, it warranted a closer look. Thompson began following the BMW, noting how the driver seemed to know exactly where he was going. That didn't rule out criminal activity. Smart criminals always did their homework about the neighborhoods they targeted. As the BMW turned into a driveway of a beautiful 2-story colonial house, Thompson made his decision. He activated his lights and pulled in behind the car, effectively blocking any escape route. This was going to be a by-the-book traffic stop, and he was going to find out exactly what this guy was really doing in this neighborhood. Carter saw the flashing lights reflect off his garage door and felt his heart sink. He'd been pulled over twice in the past year, both times while driving through upscale neighborhoods after late hospital shifts. Both times, he'd been treated like a criminal until he could prove he belonged there. He'd hoped tonight would be different. But apparently his medical degree and 15 years of saving lives didn't make him immune to racial profiling. He turned off the engine and kept his hands visible on the steering wheel, exactly as his father had taught him when he'd gotten his first driver's license 20 years ago. Always be respectful, always be compliant, and always make sure they can see your hands, his father had said. Your education and success won't protect you if someone has already decided you're a threat. Officer Thompson approached the driver's side window with his hand resting on his service weapon. The neighborhood might be safe, but you never knew what kind of person you were dealing with until you looked them in the eye. He tapped on the window with his flashlight, waiting for the driver to lower it. "Good evening," Dr. Carter said as the window came down, his voice carefully neutral. "Is there a problem, officer?" Thompson shined his flashlight into the car, noting the hospital scrubs and the tired expression on the driver's face. The man looked professional, educated, but that didn't mean anything. Some of the smartest criminals Thompson had encountered were the ones who looked most legitimate. "License and registration," Thompson said without preamble. "And step out of the vehicle. May I ask why I'm being stopped?" Dr. Carter asked, reaching slowly for his wallet. "I wasn't speeding, and I don't believe I violated any traffic laws." "Just step out of the car, sir," Thompson repeated, his tone growing firmer. "I'll explain everything once I see some identification." Carter complied, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid any actions that might be misinterpreted as threatening. As he stood beside his car, he noticed the officer was young, probably late 20s, with the kind of aggressive posture that suggested he was trying to prove something. This was going to be a long night. Thompson examined the driver's license and registration, noting that both appeared legitimate. Dr. Michael Carter, address matching the house they were parked in front of, clean driving record according to the quick computer check he ran. But something still felt off about the situation. "So you're a doctor?" Thompson asked, his tone suggesting skepticism rather than respect. "Yes. I'm an emergency physician at Children's Hospital," Dr. Carter replied. "I just finished a 12-hour shift, and I'm trying to get home to get some sleep before my next shift starts in 8 hours. "Children's Hospital," Thompson repeated. "That's a pretty fancy job. Must pay well if you can afford a car like this and a house in this neighborhood." There was something in the officer's tone that made Dr. Carter's stomach tighten. This wasn't a routine traffic stop. This was an interrogation based on the assumption that a black man couldn't legitimately afford to live in this area. "I've been practicing medicine for 15 years, Carter said carefully. "I worked very hard to get where I am." "I'm sure you did," Thompson said, though his expression suggested otherwise. "Mind if I take a look inside the vehicle, make sure everything's legitimate?" Carter knew he had the right to refuse the search, but he also knew that exercising that right would only escalate the situation. Better to comply, let the officer satisfy himself that there was nothing illegal in the car, and hopefully end this encounter as quickly as possible. "Go ahead," he said, stepping back from the vehicle. Thompson began searching the BMW methodically, looking through the glove compartment, under the seats, and in the trunk. What he found was exactly what Dr. Carter had expected: medical journals, emergency room supplies that he kept in case of roadside accidents, and the briefcase containing patient files that he was reviewing for a medical conference next week. But instead of apologizing for the unnecessary search, Thompson seemed more suspicious than ever. In his experience, people who appeared too legitimate were often trying to hide something. The medical equipment could be stolen, the journals could be props, and the clean car could be a front for illegal activities. "Where exactly did you say you were coming from tonight?" Thompson asked, his hand still resting near his weapon. "Children's Hospital," Dr. Carter repeated. "I told you, I just finished a 12-hour shift in the emergency room. And what exactly do you do there?" Dr. Carter felt his patience beginning to wear thin, but he forced himself to remain calm. Getting angry would only confirm whatever prejudices this officer already held. I'm a trauma surgeon specializing in pediatric emergency medicine, he said. I treat children who've been seriously injured in accidents or who have life-threatening medical conditions. Right, Thompson said, clearly unconvinced. And I suppose you can prove that. Carter reached into his wallet and pulled out his hospital ID badge, his medical license, and his business cards. He handed them to Thompson, who examined each one carefully under his flashlight. The credentials appeared legitimate, but Thompson had learned not to trust appearances. Fake IDs were easy to obtain, and criminals were getting more sophisticated all the time. The fact that this guy had an answer for everything just made him more suspicious. These could be fake, Thompson said, handing the documents back. Anyone can get fake credentials made these days. Carter stared at the officer in disbelief. Officer, I've shown you my driver's license, my car registration, my medical license, and my hospital ID. I've allowed you to search my vehicle. I've answered all your questions. What exactly do you think I've done wrong? I think you're in a neighborhood where you don't belong at an hour when honest people are asleep, Thompson replied. I think you're driving a car that's worth more than most people make in 5 years, and I think there's something you're not telling me about how you can afford it. The words hit Dr. Carter like a physical blow. After everything he'd accomplished, after the years of medical school and residency, after the lives he'd saved and the respect he'd earned from his colleagues, this officer saw him as nothing more than a criminal who couldn't possibly belong in this neighborhood. Officer Thompson, Carter said, reading the name tag on the young man's uniform, I understand you're just doing your job, but I haven't committed any crime. I live in this house, I drive this car legally, and I work at one of the most respected hospitals in the city. I don't know what else I can tell you to convince you that I belong here. But Thompson wasn't listening. In his mind, he'd already decided that this guy was hiding something, and he was going to find out what it was. The fact that Dr. Carter seemed so calm and articulate only reinforced Thompson's suspicions. In his experience, innocent people got nervous when questioned by police. This level of composure suggested someone who was used to dealing with law enforcement. I think we need to continue this conversation at the station, Thompson said, reaching for his handcuffs. You can explain your story to the detectives. You're arresting me? Dr. Carter asked, his voice rising slightly. On what charge? Suspicious activity, possible vehicle theft, and failure to provide satisfactory explanation for your presence in this neighborhood, Thompson replied, though he knew none of those would hold up in court. But he could hold Dr. Carter for questioning long enough to run a more thorough background check and maybe find something concrete. As Thompson moved to handcuff him, Dr. Carter's phone rang. The ringtone was distinctive, the emergency tone that meant the hospital was trying to reach him urgently. It only rang for the most serious situations, when a patient's life was in immediate danger and they needed his expertise. That's my hospital calling, Dr. Carter said urgently. Please, I need to answer it. Someone's life might be in danger. Thompson paused, looking at the phone skeptically. Right. More of your story. But as the phone continued ringing with that urgent emergency tone, Dr. Carter made a decision that would change everything. He looked Thompson directly in the eye and said something that would haunt the officer for the rest of his career. Officer Thompson, 3 hours ago I saved the life of a 7-year-old girl who was brought to my emergency room after a car accident. She was dying, and I spent 4 hours in surgery bringing her back to life. Her father was beside himself with grief and gratitude, and he thanked me for giving him his daughter back. That's where I've been tonight, saving the life of a child whose father loves her more than anything in the world. And now you're arresting me for the crime of driving home afterward. Something in Dr. Carter's voice made Thompson hesitate. There was a raw emotion there, a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. For the first time since the traffic stop began, Thompson found himself wondering if he might have made a mistake. But before he could respond, his own radio crackled to life. Unit 47, we have an update on the vehicle accident from earlier tonight. The 7-year-old victim is out of surgery and stable. The attending physician was Dr. Michael Carter. Please acknowledge. The words hit Thompson like a thunderbolt. He stared at Dr. Carter, then at his radio, then back at Dr. Carter. The 7-year-old victim, his daughter Emma, who'd been in that terrible accident, the surgery that had saved her life. Dr. Michael Carter. Thompson's hand fell away from his handcuffs, as the full weight of what was happening crashed down on him. The man he'd been harassing, the man he'd assumed was a criminal, the man he'd been about to arrest for the crime of being black in a wealthy neighborhood. This was the doctor who had saved his daughter's life. "Emma," Thompson whispered, his voice barely audible. "Emma Thompson, that was my daughter." Dr. Carter's expression changed from frustration to shock, to understanding in the span of seconds. "Your daughter," he repeated softly. "Officer Thompson, your daughter is going to be fine. She's strong, and she's going to make a full recovery." Thompson's legs nearly gave out beneath him. For the past 3 hours, he'd been sitting in the hospital waiting room, praying for a miracle while the doctors worked to save Emma's life. When Dr. Carter had finally emerged from surgery to tell him that his daughter was going to live, Thompson had been so overwhelmed with relief and gratitude that he'd barely registered the doctor's face. Now, standing in his own neighborhood at 4 a.m., he was face to face with the man who had given him back his daughter. And he'd spent the last 20 minutes treating that man like a criminal. I don't understand," Thompson stammered. "You were at the hospital. You saved Emma. But then you were here, and I thought—" "You thought what?" Dr. Carter asked quietly. "You thought that a black man couldn't live in this neighborhood? You thought I couldn't afford this car? You thought I must be up to something criminal?" Thompson wanted to deny it, wanted to claim that race had nothing to do with his actions. But as he looked into Dr. Carter's eyes, he knew that any excuse would be a lie. The truth was ugly and shameful, but it was undeniable. "I made assumptions," Thompson said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw you and I made assumptions based on the color of my skin," Dr. Carter finished for him. "Officer Thompson, I understand that you're doing a difficult job in a challenging time. But what happened here tonight can't happen. Not to me, not to anyone else." Thompson's radio crackled again. "Unit 47, please respond with status update." Thompson looked at the radio, then at Doc Carter, then at the house where the man who'd saved his daughter's life was just trying to get some sleep before his next shift. The irony was so crushing that he could barely breathe. "Unit 47, false alarm," Thompson said into his radio. "No further action required." He turned back to Doc Carter, searching for words that could somehow undo the damage he'd done. "Doctor, I owe you an apology, not just for tonight, but for everything. You saved my daughter's life, and you don't owe me anything for doing my job," Dr. Carter interrupted. "But you do owe it to yourself and to your community to examine why this happened. Officer Thompson, I've been pulled over 6 times in the past 2 years, always in neighborhoods like this one, always by officers who assumed I didn't belong. Tonight was different only because you happened to be the father of a patient I'd treated." Thompson felt sick to his stomach. The man standing in front of him had spent 4 hours fighting to save Emma's life, had given Thompson back his daughter, had shown the kind of skill and dedication that made him a hero, and Thompson had repaid that by treating him like a criminal. "What can I do?" Thompson asked desperately. "How can I make this right?" Dr. Carter looked at the young officer for a long moment, seeing not just the man who had harassed him, but a father who was struggling with the collision between his prejudices and his gratitude. "You can do your job without letting your assumptions about people's race determine how you treat them," Dr. Carter said finally. "You can remember that the next black man you pull over might be the doctor who saves your life, or the teacher who educates your children, or the engineer who builds the bridges you drive on. You can remember that respect and dignity shouldn't depend on whether someone has saved your daughter's life." Thompson nodded, tears forming in his eyes. "I will. I promise you, I will." Dr. Carter's phone rang again with the emergency tone. This time Thompson didn't question it. "Carter, we need you back here immediately," came the voice from the hospital. "We have a multiple vehicle accident coming in, 3 children in critical condition." Dr. Carter looked at Thompson, then at his car, then back at Thompson. "Officer, I need to get back to the hospital. There are children who need my help." "Go," Thompson said immediately, stepping aside. "Please go save those kids." But as Dr. Carter moved toward his car, Thompson called out to him. "Doctor, wait. Let me give you an escort. It's the least I can do." Dr. Carter paused, considering the offer. Then he nodded. "Thank you, Officer Thompson. That would help." As they drove through the empty streets toward Children's Hospital, Thompson's police car clearing the way for Dr. Carter's BMW. Both men were lost in their own thoughts. Thompson was grappling with the realization that his prejudices had nearly led him to arrest the man who'd saved his daughter's life. Carter was thinking about the children waiting for him at the hospital and about the conversation he'd just had with a young police officer who might never look at the world the same way again. They arrived at the hospital in record time, and as Dr. Carter rushed toward the emergency entrance, Thompson called out to him one more time. "Doctor, thank you, for Emma, and for tonight. For helping me understand." Dr. Carter turned back briefly. "Take care of your daughter, Officer Thompson. And remember what we talked about." Then he was gone, disappearing through the hospital doors to once again fight death for children he'd never met, to use his skills and dedication to bring hope to families facing their darkest moments. Thompson sat in his patrol car for a long time, staring at the hospital entrance. Somewhere inside, his daughter was sleeping peacefully, because the man he'd just humiliated had refused to give up on her. Somewhere inside, that same man was now working to save other children, other families, other futures. The radio crackled with routine calls, minor disturbances, noise complaints, the mundane business of keeping a city safe. But Thompson couldn't bring himself to respond. He was thinking about assumptions and prejudice, about the difference between policing and persecution, about the kind of officer he wanted to be versus the kind he'd been tonight. 3 weeks later, Officer Bradley Thompson requested a transfer to the Community Policing Division. He wanted to spend his career building relationships with the people he served, rather than viewing them as potential threats. He enrolled in diversity training courses, attended community meetings, and slowly began to understand the impact that prejudice could have on both individuals and entire communities. Michael Carter continued his work at Children's Hospital, saving lives and building a reputation as one of the finest pediatric trauma surgeons in the Southeast. He never spoke publicly about his encounter with Officer Thompson, but he did use it as a teaching moment for the medical students and residents he mentored, helping them understand that being a doctor meant serving all patients with equal dedication, regardless of how they or their families might treat you outside the hospital. Emma Thompson made a full recovery and returned to 2nd grade with nothing more than a few scars and an incredible story about the doctor who'd saved her life. She drew pictures of Dr. Carter for her school's career day presentation, and when her father saw them, he was reminded once again of how close he'd come to arresting the man who'd given him back his daughter. The two men's paths crossed again 6 months later, when Thompson brought Emma to the hospital for a follow-up appointment. Dr. Carter was professional and kind, asking Emma about school and complimenting her on how well she'd healed. There was no animosity, no lingering resentment, just a doctor caring for his patient and a father grateful for his daughter's health. After the appointment, Thompson approached Dr. Carter privately. "Doctor, I want you to know that I've changed. Because of what happened that night, because of what you taught me. I'm a better officer now, and more importantly, I'm a better person." Dr. Carter smiled. "That's all any of us can do, Officer Thompson. Learn from our mistakes and try to be better tomorrow than we were today." As Thompson walked away with Emma skipping beside him, Dr. Carter reflected on the strange ways that life could bring people together. A tragic accident had brought a little girl to his operating table. Prejudice and assumption had brought her father to his driveway. But in the end, it was understanding and forgiveness that had brought them both to a better place. The lesson was simple but profound. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, not because of what they might do for you someday, but because they're human beings with inherent worth. The doctor who saves your child's life, the teacher who educates your community, the neighbor who lives down the street, they all deserve the same consideration, the same benefit of the doubt, the same basic human decency. Sometimes it takes a moment of shocking realization to make us examine our own biases and assumptions. Sometimes we need to see how our prejudices can hurt the very people we should be thanking. But when those moments come, we have a choice. We can make excuses and continue as before, or we can use them as opportunities to grow, to change and to become better versions of ourselves. Officer Thompson chose growth, Dr. Carter chose forgiveness, and Emma Thompson grew up in a world where both men had learned something important about seeing beyond surface appearances to recognize the humanity in everyone they met. If this story moved you, remember that respect shouldn't require a personal connection to be genuine. We shouldn't need to learn that someone has saved our child's life to treat them with dignity. Every person we encounter deserves our best assumptions about their character, our benefit of the doubt about their intentions, and our recognition of their fundamental worth as human beings. The next time you find yourself making quick judgments about someone based on their appearance, their race, or their circumstances, remember Dr. Carter and Officer Thompson. Remember that the person you're looking at might be the hero in someone else's story, the answer to someone's prayers, the difference between life and death for someone's child. And remember that being wrong about someone's character or circumstances isn't just embarrassing. It can be devastating for them and transformative for you in ways you never expected. Because sometimes the person you think doesn't belong is exactly the person the world needs most.